It's my pleasure to introduce to you your speaker today. David Gabler is a very good friend. He is in the public relations business for the University of Texas at San Antonio, and he'll tell you more about that. But more importantly, he was the public relations guru during the year I was district governor, and he is a former ambassadorial scholar where Rotary paid for part of his education. So that $100 a year that each of us gives to the Rotary Foundation, that's your money at work, and that's what it results in. David, please join me in welcoming David Gabler.
Thank you, Jim. Now, I've asked Linda to help me on time because I first understand that I'm the only thing now that separates us from a piece of cake. So Linda's going to help me with that, and the cake sure does look good. I'm going to just talk about three things briefly today, and I'm hoping we have a little bit of time for Q&A. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is what I do for UTSA, and secondly, how some of that might relate to us in clubs as far as telling our story and public relations efforts. And then third, I'm going to take time just a little bit to tell you briefly about UTSA and the move to build a premier public research university here in San Antonio and why that's important to all of us in the room. I actually got into the communications business a little bit by accident. It was because of Rotary. I didn't know anything about Rotary when I was in college, and I went to England, as Jim said, because of Rotary. And that's where I first learned about the good that Rotary does. And Brandon was talking earlier about getting school supplies for kids. You know what? Rotary does so much, from building playgrounds to helping kids get school supplies to helping eradicate polio in the world. There is no other organization that does that like Rotary. And to be a part of it is so wonderful. But to think that I didn't know anything about that when I was an undergraduate or younger in the Midwest where I grew up. But Rotary asked me to go around England when I was there and say, would you help tell the message of being a Rotary ambassadorial scholar? I said, sure. So I minimized my classes. I was okay. Travel for Rotary, study. So I changed my schedule and I went on a moment's notice all over the United Kingdom to help tell the story of Rotary. And that's sort of how I got into communications. And that's what I do today because of that. Communications, two quick stories. It's real important to tell our story, whether it be UTSA or whether it be the Dominion Rotary Club or whether it be Rotary District here in South Texas. And how do we tell our story? People have been trying to do that for ages. I'm reminded of the story when Moses was getting toward the Red Sea and the Egyptians were in pursuit. So he assembled his key leaders and said, what are we going to do? Well, he asked the admiral of his navy, and the admiral, of course, said, you know, the only way to get across, we've got to use boats. It's the safest and it's the quickest. So he looks to his general and he says, how are we going to do this? And the general says, we've got to build a bridge. We've got great engineers, we'll build a bridge. So Moses looks at his chief communications person and asks her, what do you propose? Well, you know, I don't have a solution, but I guarantee you this. If we get across, you'll get 2 pages in the Old Testament. It's like, okay, we got 2 pages, that's good. And now another religious-related story a little bit sooner. You know, what we try to do in communications is stay on message and know what our message is. And I think we've all been a little guilty of that at times. I try to laugh about it because I serve as a spokesperson for UTSA. It's Jim and Linda who have done so much, not only for Rotary, but also for UTSA, and thank you. They know Dr. Romo very well, our president. My job is to try to make sure he's the spokesperson on the good and great things, and generally I have to take the things that are not so good and great. And staying on message sometimes can be a little difficult, and I'm reminded of the story of the pastor who walked into his church one Sunday morning, and young Alex was sitting there staring at this plaque with all these names and little flags on this bronze plaque. And the pastor said, well, good morning, Alex. How are you doing? What's going on? Young Alex looks up at the pastor and says, what is that? The pastor said, well, you know, that is it's a plaque dedicated to the men and women that we've lost in service. And young Alex continues, would that be the 9:15 or 10:45? So the pastor wasn't real good on staying on message or understanding what it is. And Fortunately, sometimes we aren't, but we always have to. I serve as spokesperson for UTSA, and I also manage the team that does everything we can to try to make sure you hear good things about UTSA and manage our message. And primarily we do that by staying in the media in Texas, particularly in this region, and particularly in San Antonio, because it's real important that we share our message here. And secondly, what I want to talk about is how some of that relates to Rotary. What we try to do frequently is make sure that you're hearing stories about UTSA, because I often get inquiries from Rotary clubs throughout our district, 5840, what can we do to share the story of Rotary? And I come down to 2 S's. But it's real important for each of you in your businesses, in your law firms, in your Rotary club, in your churches, to make sure you can always do that, especially in this day and age, and I'll touch upon that briefly. The 2 S's are 1, short, and 2, simple. And of course, story starts with S2, so remember that. You've got to be able to tell your story, make it simple, and make it interesting to someone. I often tell people, why don't you start with your spouse? Try to tell your story as quickly as possible, because if you can't do it quickly and you can't pique interest, you're not going to get your message across. And that's what we have to do with reporters every day at the university. And we have communications staff at the main campus here at 1604 and I-10. We also have campus staff down at downtown campus and at the Institute of Texas Cultures. But the same thing we're doing every day, I think, is something we need to be doing in Rotary, trying to tell our story. And it is a great story indeed. What I loved about the happy moments a little while ago were they're almost all great little quick stories. And, you know, they almost could be told in 140 characters. And the reason that's important now, I'm not suggesting that all of us go out and become stars of the Tweeterland. But it's limited to 140 characters. And it comes back to what I mentioned earlier, short and simple. We're talking about the President's State of the University address coming up this fall. And some of us even joked, wouldn't it be great if someone could effectively do a State of the University address in 140 characters or less? That's going way far out there. But no, we better not try to do that. But speaking about the university, and then I'm going to try to open up some Q&A on any subject you want, either my job or communications issues or UTSA. I've been there 15 years now. It is such an important thing what we're doing at UTSA for everybody in this room and everybody in San Antonio. San Antonio is the largest city in the country without a premier public research university. And UTSA, as most of you know, was selected by the last legislative session in Texas among 6 other institutions to be one of those institutions on the way to premier research university status. And one of the things I think is really going well in UTSA's favor is our trajectory. In research, in number of students, we're one of the fastest growing universities now in the country, and in service to the community. What other institutions in the country can claim things such as recruiting Larry Coker to coach football, 2-time national champion, recruiting Les Shepard from Sandia Labs to move all his labs from Sandia to San Antonio? What other universities in Texas right now can claim to have one of the top 10 best researchers in the world in the area of Alzheimer's? And no other university in Texas right now can claim, like UTSA, to have the world's most powerful electron microscope.